Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Thank you for listening to Your Working Life, my podcast series featuring thought leaders in the career and personal growth arena. I know that you spend a significant portion of your life at work, so my goal is to provide you with tools, inspiration, and resources so you can enjoy your career and love your life. And I am thrilled to welcome my very special guest to the show today, Mike Eichenwald. Mike, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm really excited to dive into a juicy conversation. But Mike, I want to tell our listening audience all about you. Mike Eichenwald leads LRN's Governance, Culture, and Leadership Advisory Services. He and his team of senior advisors help businesses and nonprofit leaders around the world envision, architect, and adopt new 21st century approaches to how they lead, operate, and govern. And Mike spent the bulk of his career advising and working in large, complex corporations. And right now, he is operating out of New York City. Is that correct, Mike? Are you in New York today?
That's right on 57th and 5th overlooking Central Park. It's
Brilliant.
A beautiful day.
Well, we are channeling the Big Apple as we speak. Mike, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to learn more about your expertise. And let me start right off the bat by asking, how significant a connection did LRN's study uncover between a company's character and its performance?
Well, we feel that the connection is quite material, and the evidence is starting to become overwhelming. I think for a long time, people have been talking about the question about whether you can do well by doing good. Yeah. And we think that all the evidence that we're seeing from our work with clients, as well as the research we've run, is that really is the case. We tend to look at companies as falling into one of three what we call archetypes. There's a certain group of companies where the culture in the organization feels blind obedient. It feels like, the military that won World War II, that people do what they're told and they do it because they're told to do it. There's a type of organization that we call informed acquiescent. This is the way a lot of modern, complex matrix organizations operate. There's rules, there's process, there's carrots and sticks. And then there's a third type of organization that we call self-governing. And these are really purpose-led, values-inspired organizations where they're trying to have a significant impact in the world, where people's behavior is grounded on fundamental values, where leadership is based on moral authority, not just formal authority. And our research has found that those organizations are dramatically outperforming their peers across a broad set of business outcomes, from things like innovation, or customer satisfaction, to the things that companies need to do to have a license to operate, which is lower levels of misconduct and ethical performance.
Mike, this work that you're doing at LRN is fascinating to me. In the career development world, we're hearing a lot about the millennial generation, which is one of the largest generations in the workforce today, and they will be 50% of the population working in 2020. And this concept of social responsibility, making a difference in our communities and our world, matters to them. So we're seeing a shift in organizations. And I think this is so directly relatable to that because the workforce is changing. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. At the same time, my colleague Doug Seidman likes to say, millennial is a mindset. It's a psychographic as much as it is a generation. And I think that there have always been people who've been passionate about the world that they live in. There's always been people who have sought meaningful work and have had higher expectations of conduct from the organizations they work for. What I think is different about this generation is they want it now. They want it in an integrated way, and they're not afraid to ask for it.
Exactly.
And I think that is what is going to change the workforce. They've put it at the top of the strategic agenda, even though it's always been something that people have craved and that certain organizations have been able to get right.
It's so well put. They are prioritizing it as a number one value, and they're making career decisions based on that. So let's dive deeper into your work at LRN. How are levels of innovation affected by all of this?
Yeah, I mean, across generally, if one looks at a report, which we call the Hal Report, one sees a general commonality of patterns across really all the business outcomes that we looked at. Certainly within innovation, whether it's a systemic innovation in products and services or recognition as a real innovator, or even the willingness to adopt good ideas, we're seeing that values-based organizations are scoring 20 points higher than organizations that run more on process. And on top of that, there's also a 40-point gap between organizations that really focus on task and power. Now, the reason we think that you see this uptake of this increased innovation is it says something very fundamental about how the organization works. I've spent a lot of my time in companies really focused on the innovation agenda. I mean, who isn't these days, right? Everybody knows they need to innovate to grow and has seen how those companies that do it best reap unheard of rewards relative to their competitors. The thing that we're finding, though, is that the way to get innovation is not the way most organizations have traditionally thought about it, which is innovation programs or following tighter process on allocation of resources. All of that's important, but what our work has found is that the real way to unlock innovation is to focus on building trust among colleagues. And by trust, we mean the willingness to extend trust, to show vulnerability, to put people in a position to take risks. Think about what it's like if you're in a room and there's a senior person there and there's a number of colleagues and somebody has an idea. If they want to share that idea, they got to stick their neck out, right? They got to take a risk. They got to know that people aren't going to look at them like they're a fool or that they've said something that's inappropriate. People only share those ideas when they feel that they've been extended trust to take that risk, to put the idea out there and see what happens. Too often in organizations, we see a disconnect between the stated goals and the processes that really drive how people engage every day. On the one hand, we hear freedom to fail or go innovate. On the other hand, the man or woman who does take a risk and fails, they're out their job.
Yeah.
Or if you want to innovate, you got to go get 8 signatures to get the funding in order to take a risk or do that. Or you're told you're going to have all these downstream implications on other lines of business, which in no way was thought of when people made that broad pronouncement of what they wanted you to actually try to do.
So let's talk about this in very real, candid terms. I agree with you 100%. I love hearing about the trust and the values-based organizations and the concept of a true environment where you are encouraged to take risk and perhaps fail forward, right? We learn great things in the recovery. Is that feasible in these large corporate behemoths? And I don't mean that in a negative way, but these very big companies. Can you scale that culture?
Well, I don't think that I think it's not only feasible, it's an imperative. Okay. I think the organizations that don't do it they'll increasingly become irrelevant as people take away their business. One example that I heard about recently that I thought is a good model is, let's take Disney, which is talk about a behemoth. One subsidiary of Disney is ESPN.
Right.
And do you have you ever met anybody who has an ESPN phone?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, the reason I ask is because actually the phone never got launched because
I'm sorry, I thought you meant the ESP app where they're checking things. Forgive me, totally different. My bad.
Yes, the ESPN phone. So the ESPN at one point wanted to actually put out their own phone.
Okay.
And they invested tons of money in order to make that happen. It never did. Right. In the end, it turned out to be something that they couldn't launch, that was impractical given their business model and what they were trying to accomplish and the direction of the industry. Now, what's amazing is the president of ESPN, that was his project. Huh. And now when ESPN says, we want you to take risks, we want you to fail, all they have to do is look at that guy, the guy who's running the company, and there they have evidence and example of what that means at their organization.
Right.
Too many organizations talk about that, but they can't show you a case of failure. They can't show you where somebody tried that. And people day in, day out have an experience when they walk into a meeting, when they have a conversation with their boss, when they look at the way processes are run, whether it's performance management or strategic planning, where there's an absence of trust and an absence of a willingness to really walk that talk.
Good example. And forgive me, my bad. I was thinking the app, not the phone. So, of course, we haven't heard of that. Wow.
Yeah.
So let's dive in specifically to the great work you're doing at LRN. Are organizations measuring the wrong thing? And what would you encourage them to measure if they indeed are?
That's a wonderful question. I'm glad you asked. the axiom that what you measure is what you get is as true today as it's ever been. Um, and if the thesis we have at LRN is that those companies that better scale elevated behaviors, and by elevated behaviors, we mean things like speaking out, right? Collaboration, acting with integrity, extending trust to one another. If you want those things from your employees, you need to be as rigorous as you are about the traditional business outcomes that we've mastered metrics around, right? Whether that's return on investment or share price or profit share or growth, we have very mature, seasoned metrics, tested metrics to understand and make sure that we get those things. But behavior, we think, is the next the source of competitive advantage in the future. And we haven't done a good job of scaling a set of metrics that enable us to do that. So one of the tools that we've invested a lot of effort in developing, we call it How Metrics, which is a set of vehicles that enables us to go into an organization and really understand where trust is happening and where it's not, where collaboration is happening, where it's not. When people make decisions, are they thinking about purpose? Are they thinking long term? Or are they thinking about the next quarter or the next conversation they have to have with their manager? When you introduce these kinds of metrics into the organization, you enable the organization to reorient itself to delivering on these things, which are really your true leading indicators that will get you the performance that you want. It enables you to understand where you're strong and where you have some gaps, where you have senior leaders or managers who are getting these things right, and where you have some people who are maybe able to get the job done in the short term, but aren't necessarily building the foundation for long-term success.
So, Mike, let's drill a little deeper. The buzzword in the talent management world is employee engagement. And we know the research, the studies tell us that engaged employers are more likely to go above and beyond. They're more apt to stay in their organization. Now, LRN conducted the Hal Report, and you identified that there's something even more important than engagement. So tell me about that.
Yeah, engagement is critical. No company can be successful without engaged employees. I think that what we found in our research is engagement is table stakes. I mean, you can't create a great company on engagement alone. Some of that is the way people use and think about engagement. If I go to an employee and ask you, "Are you going to be here in 12 months?" which is a key metric for engagement, that doesn't necessarily mean that that employee is the employee you want there in 12 months. If I go say, "Are you going to refer a friend?" Well, which friend? Is it the friend you have who's the most competent, the most ambitious, the person of the highest character, or is it your friend who just needs a job? When I ask about discretionary effort, what kind of effort? Does that mean you're just going to work a little harder or a little faster? Or you're really going to contribute your ideas? You're really going to stick your neck out? You're really going to go to a colleague who maybe is doing something that's unethical or making a mistake in their work and say, hey, there's a better way to do things. So in our research, we found two things that we think are particularly interesting and relevant for the engagement conversation. The first is we found that if you really want to create engaged employees, you need to think about why your organization exists and how it operates. You need to think about what sits at the core of your corporate character. That organizations that have a purpose-inspired mission, they want to make the world a better place, that they have a deep set of values, and those values are understood as core behaviors that people can do every day in and out, and that have what we call a higher level of consciousness. They think about the other as an other. They recognize them as a full person or a full entity that can pursue its own dreams. That those organizations that they get that right at their core, they're the ones that have the most engaged employees. The other thing we found is that if you really want to lead and you really want to win in your industry, you actually need something beyond that. What you need is employees who demonstrate three distinct characteristics. First, they're authentically dedicated to your company, right? They really care. Secondly, they take deep accountability for their work, right? That means they're willing to stick their neck out. They're willing to take on a little bit more because they think it's the right thing to do for the company to be successful. And third, they take full responsibility, right? They exercise universal vigilance for their peers, for everything that's happening within the company. If you can get those three things right, then we think you can really outperform.
So let me take this a step further then. And I want to give a shout out to the report just so people can put this in context. So this 2016 Hal Report conducted by LRN was validated by the Center for Effective Organizations at the University of Southern California, and it's clearly one of the most ambitious long-term research project in organizational effectiveness, behavior, and leadership extraordinary. Over 16,000 full-time employees in 17 countries across all major industries and occupations responded. So just want to set that up. You took a deeper dive to say there's a difference between inspiration and engagement. So talk to me about that.
So, there's only three ways to get somebody to do something. Yeah. Right? You can coerce them. I can force you, do it or you're fired.
Yeah, which happens.
And sometimes that's important, right? There should be fireable offenses in companies. You can motivate somebody. Here's an extra $1, you'll get a higher bonus, you do things right, you can get a promotion, and that's important too. Both of those are external. They're things that you do to other people, and they're quite effective at shifting behavior, right? We're on the cusp of an election, and billions of dollars are going to be spent, in the coming months deciding who we want to vote for, trying to get people to vote one way or another. And important, and some of it will even have impact. But if you want to get inspiration from your employees, right? Employees who will really take full accountability, act with full responsibility, contribute their creativity, their character, right? Bring their full selves to work. That can't be coerced or motivated. That can really only be inspired. And that requires a different kind of leadership. And I think this is the challenge that companies face, right? We've scaled a set of managers who have a certain set of competencies around how to manage in organizations that were very focused on getting the next level of efficiency. But if we live in a world where we need companies that can do fundamentally different things at different levels around the world, introducing new products and services in an age when consumers demand more, both in terms of how those products and services get produced and in addition to what they do, we're going to need to figure out how to create managers that are really and truly inspirational leaders.
So, Mike, let me ask, the study clearly illustrates that purpose matters to performance. Are there companies out there walking the talk that are doing this very well?
Well, certainly there are a lot of companies who are talking the talk.
Okay.
Everywhere you look, people are advertising their purpose. And certainly the marketing agencies have done a tremendous job of creating that language that's out there. Getting it right is a lot more challenging. Yeah. I mean, certainly as you see in our survey, we only find that 8% of companies are leading edge in terms of really being purpose-led and values-inspired. I think that it took many years and many decades to create the organizations that dominated our economy over the last 10 or 20 years. And I think we're at the cusp of a new era where a different kind of company will win. We see a number of companies who are getting that right. I think they're the kinds of companies that we talk about them all the time in this industry, and I'm sure you do in all of your talent work, because they're ones that are exceptional. Whether it's a Whole Foods or a Southwest Airlines. Certainly, we see organizations in the startup community, some of which have grown dramatically in the last 5 or 10 years, that are getting pieces of this right. But I think that really figuring out, how do I scale purpose? How do I create companies where people who want to have impact in the world, who have a point of view around what the world should look like, and it's a better world for all, choose to come to an organization because they think that's the place where they can pursue their passions and have greatest impact. I think that really is the next frontier, and I think we all have a lot to learn about how we get there.
So tell me, were there differences between the C-suite executive level and those in the rank and file who are lower level employees?
So one of the most fascinating findings we find in the study, and one of the ones that has gotten the most attention, is exactly that point. There's a fundamental difference between working in the C-suite and working elsewhere. And we think it's something that executives are missing. If I show up at work every day with the people at the top of the company, and maybe I'm the CEO, and maybe I've hand-chosen my team, or maybe hand-chosen half of it, maybe I've worked with many of these people for 10 years, maybe some are new, but again, I pick them, and we work in a very tight way against a broad set of issues. It is far easier for us to align around purpose, to extend trust to each other, to take risks, to collaborate. versus elsewhere in the organization where there is a broad set of systems and processes and expectations that get in the way of us doing that. We've had so many conversations with leaders in the C-suite who are saying things like, if I could just get my people to do A, B, and C, and I don't understand why they won't. We find that a big part of that disconnect is the failure and to scale the kinds of behaviors that they've created in a small group across the broader enterprise. So our data found there tends to be about a 20-point gap across all of the dimensions of elevated behavior that we've been talking about throughout this discussion between the C-suite and others, that the gap extends as you move, kind of further down the hierarchy across the organization, and that when you start talking about organizations that have a scale of over 10,000 people, the challenges become even more fundamental.
Yeah.
Given the breadth of geographies and functional units and individuals you need to work through.
So ultimately, you're trying to steer people towards self-governed organizations. And Mike, I know that's a new term to some. So help us understand how this model really increases values and ultimately performance across all levels, not just the executive ranks.
Yeah, I think what we're really asking companies and leaders to think about is how much better would your organization be if people did the right thing because they thought it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So how do you think about your organization differently if you're managing your systems and your processes and your how you do talent, who you promote in a way that says, I want this organization to put the focus on the individual and what they do, so they share their ideas, they make the right decisions, they come to work every day impassioned to make a difference. How do I operationalize all of that? And when we talk about self-governing, when we use that word, that's what we're talking about. How do I create self-governing employees? Because we think self-governing employees are the key to competitive advantage.
Excellent. Well, I hear the passion in your voice, Mike. It's really infectious, and I so appreciate your energy, your wisdom, and your expertise. And again, you are leading the LRN Governance, Culture, and Leadership Advisory Services. Tell us how we can follow up with you after the show.
So we have a website at lrn.com. You can go there and you can download a report, learn a little bit more about the work that we do with companies around the world. And I'd be happy if any of the listeners want to learn more, you can find my contact information there, and I'd be thrilled to provide more background and detail.
Excellent. Mike, you've been a stellar guest. I so appreciate your time, and I hope our paths cross in person sometime soon.
I look forward to that.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Your Working Life, where my goal is to help you design your career destiny so it doesn't happen by default. Career and life satisfaction is possible, and it's time to embrace what you love doing so you can do more of it. My show is now available on iTunes, YouTube, Podbean, and Stitcher. Leave a comment because I always appreciate hearing from my listeners. I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Take good care.